Hi everyone, I'm Claire Saffitz. Welcome to my home kitchen. Today we are back from our Austin road trip where we had so much fun, and I'm here to show you more recipes from my kitchen. Today I'm making a cheesy yeasted biscuit. It's this recipe that I've been playing around with for a while, and it kind of splits the difference between like a fluffy dinner roll and a flaky buttermilk biscuit. They're so delicious. I'm gonna flavor the butter with some spices. I'm very excited to show you how to make them. There are a million different kinds of biscuits, and there is actually a particular style of biscuit that is yeast raised rather than like baking soda or baking powder. So they're called angel biscuits. This is kind of a variation on an angel biscuit, but I'm gonna do an extra step where I do something called laminating. And basically it's a technique where I incorporate butter in a big block and roll it out and fold it, and it creates all of these even layers separated by like thin sheets of butter. So if you've seen like our puff pastry episode, same technique. And so they're so buttery, but also like really light and airy and so delicious. So the ingredients, and these are cheesy biscuits. So I'm incorporating grated cheese into the dough itself. So I'm starting with all-purpose flour. I have a stick and a half of butter. Some of it's cut into pieces because that goes into the dough. The stick of butter is used for lamination. Some sugar, kosher salt, instant yeast, a mixture of spices, dried dill, cayenne, onion powder, 1 clove of fresh garlic, 7 ounces of sharp cheddar, and buttermilk. In terms of special equipment, I do everything by hand. You'll just need like a rolling pin, a bench scraper, a box grater, like super basic stuff that I'm sure you already have at home. Before I get into the recipe, I want to thank our friends at Kerrygold for sponsoring this episode. As you know, Kerrygold are the makers of superior butter and cheese products. All of their products are made from milk from Irish grass-fed cows raised on small family farms. I love using all Kerrygold products, not only for the superior flavor, but also because they're free of preservatives. And I especially love the reserve cheddar, which is aged for 2 years. It's like extremely sharp, but also creamy and smooth. And it's just gonna be so good in my cheesy cheddar biscuits. And of course, the butter, both unsalted and salted, is a staple in our house. I use the butter in all of my baking to make like incredibly buttery, delicious baked goods like croissants, pie dough, these biscuits, anything where I want a really pronounced butter flavor. And I'm also gonna use the reserve cheddar. They make an entire cheese line. I love the cheddar because it's sort of delightfully sharp, but still smooth and creamy. It ages for 2 years. Also made from the milk from grass-fed Irish cows. Kerrygold products are a home run all around. You can find the products in most major grocery stores, but also check out the website below for more info. And now I'm gonna get back into the recipe. So the first step in making the biscuit recipe is to bring together the dough. It's really, really straightforward and easy. I'm starting with 3 cups of all-purpose flour. I'm adding a couple of tablespoons of sugar. The sugar doesn't make it sweet. It's just there to like bring out the flavor of the other ingredients and also encourage browning so they get like really toasty and golden in the oven. Kosher salt, 2 teaspoons. I'm using Diamond Crystal. And if you're using Morton at home, Morton is denser, so you use like about half that. Then I'm gonna add my yeast. This is instant yeast. It's 1.5 teaspoons. Often, like I go back and forth between instant yeast and active dry in my recipes. A lot of it is just like what I have at home. You could use active dry. You would just want to dissolve it in like 2 tablespoons of warm water first, but instant yeast I like because you can just add it directly to your dry ingredients. Okay, so then I'm going to add, this is a half a stick or 4 tablespoons of butter that I cut into little pieces. So I'm gonna add this in. And this basically starts the way like a lot of sort of buttermilk biscuits start, where I'm gonna smash the butter in. I'm just using less butter than I normally would because of course we're gonna add a bunch of butter when I add the butter block and laminate it in. So I'm just kind of tossing everything together. The butter is, I mean, I chilled it, but it's been out of the fridge for a little bit while we set up. So it's like, it's definitely not softened, it's slightly tempered, but you just don't want it to be room temp. You want it to be cold enough that it kind of holds its shape. And that's only because you don't want it to stick to your fingers when you're doing this, but it's not really precise. All you want to do is really work the butter in and smash it with your fingertips to break it down into like little tiny pieces. You want to go until the largest pieces of butter are maybe like lentil sized, but generally you want it to be almost like so worked in that you can't even really see any more butter pieces. It's not that important or precise, but it does have kind of like a tenderizing effect on the dough. So that's why I like to add just this little bit of fat to the dough itself and then laminate in. the butter block. So now that I have the butter almost entirely worked into the flour mixture, I'm gonna grate in my cheese. You can use any kind of cheddar that you want. I like a sharp cheddar. I wouldn't use the pre-grated stuff because generally like the stuff that comes in the block is a lot fresher. And of course I'm using Kerrygold Reserve aged cheddar, which has such great complexity of flavor. So I'm just grating it in on the large holes of the box grater.
What was that pro trick you just did?
Oh, that I coated it in the flour? That's kind of instinctual because it's like I do a lot of recipes where I grate butter in this way, frozen butter, and coating it in flour just helps to prevent the pieces from sticking together, but this is cheddar, so it's not really gonna clump a whole lot. Oh, so this is a 7-ounce block. You could do 6, you could do a little less. I wouldn't go more than 7 though, because once you start adding a lot of cheese, it does tend to weigh down the dough quite a bit. I love aged cheddar because I love when it has like those little crystals in it, like the way that an aged parm does. I love the sharpness. I like all my food to have some amount of like acid in it, so I love that it's like has that sharp flavor. Okay, so here you see I have all my little cheese shreds. So now I'm ready to add my liquid. I am using buttermilk. Again, because I'm trying to kind of like make this almost hybrid style of like flaky buttermilk biscuit, but yeasted, so it's also really like light and fluffy like a roll, like bread. So I'm just tossing through all of that cheese. So I'm gonna make a little bit of a well in the center. You want your buttermilk to be room temp. That is going to help the yeast kind of activate. If it were cold, it's just gonna really slow things down a lot. So the proof is gonna take longer. So room temp buttermilk. And actually commercial yeast like this likes a slightly acidic environment. So the buttermilk and the yeast go well together. So now I'm gonna bring together the dough. Anytime I have like liquid like this and flour, I like to use any kind of tool like a spatula or a bowl scraper like this to help me bring it together, because as soon as your hands hit the liquid and then hit the flour, they become coated and sticky. So it's just easier to bring this together like this. You could put it in a stand mixer, but it's so easy and like you don't really need to work it. So I think it's just better to do it all by hand. So in the bowl, I want to just mix it until all of the buttermilk is absorbed, but it's going to be really uneven in texture with some really wet spots and some dry spots. But as soon as it forms kind of a shaggy dough, I'm going to turn it out onto my work surface. You can see like the wet spots and all that, those dry little floury bits. So I want to get everything out. And now I'm just going to continue to work this on the surface, kind of folding it, kneading it, and bringing it together. The goal here, I'm not trying to like develop gluten the way that I would if I were making like a bread recipe. I just want to work it until all the flour is evenly hydrated and I have like a pretty evenly mixed dough. So make sure you're incorporating all those little dry bits. And what you're looking for is the flour to be completely hydrated. So it will be a little bit sticky in places, but firm enough basically. It'll feel like dough. So that's it. That's all I really need to work it. You can use a scraper to clean off your hands. And then just kind of form it into a ball. So now we're ready to let the dough do its first rise. So I'm gonna put this back into the mixing bowl that I used for putting it together. I'm gonna just clean it out a little bit, cover it, set it out at room temp. We're gonna wait until it's like between 50% and 100% expanded in size. While we're waiting for the dough to rise, I'm gonna put together my seasoned butter. I keep referring to the process of lamination and calling it a butter block, but I'm not actually gonna incorporate the butter in a block the way that you would if you were making like traditional croissants or puff pastry. I'm gonna kind of like spread it onto the dough. It's just easier, like a little more low key, more appropriate for a biscuit recipe like this. But I thought, why not take the opportunity to season it and like increase the amount of flavor in the biscuits? And while you could add a lot of these ingredients to the dough, something very specific happens, which is the spices that I'm gonna add and the garlic kind of like sizzle and fry in the butter as it's baking in the oven. And so it just like creates more of that flavor that I want. So I have 1 stick of butter, 4 ounces. I'm gonna add a couple of dried spices. I have some onion powder, some cayenne, and some dried dill, which is something I really like. I'm kind of going for the flavors of like ranch. It's gonna go so well with the cheddar and like the buttermilk flavor and that kind of tanginess. So that's gonna go in. Then I have a garlic clove. I love raw garlic flavor. Harris and I were just talking about how it's kind of like the key to everything. So I'm gonna do some raw garlic in here. And it kind of half cooks in the oven, but it still retains a little bit of that sharpness of raw. So I really like it. I just don't need the whole thing. If you have a small clove, you can do the whole thing. This is more like medium large. That is going to go in. I didn't have these ingredients out in the beginning, but I am going to add a little salt and pepper. Now I just want to work this. The butter is room temp, so it's really soft and spreadable. I just want to work this with a flexible spatula until it's very evenly mixed. Okay, so it already smells so good.
So it's like an herb butter.
Yeah, and I love seeing the flecks of the dried dill, and I love seeing it like through the layers in the biscuits also. All right, so this is now very evenly mixed. You can see a little bit of the red specks of cayenne too. So I have a small offset spatula here. This is going to help me spread the butter across the surface of the dough. So now I also made a swap of the dough a little bit earlier, and it's been rising off to the side. So I'm going to check it and see if we're ready to move on to the next phase, which is rolling out the dough and incorporating the butter. Okay, so this is the dough. When I poke it, do you see how it springs back? It's a little bit harder to gauge the how much it's really grown in size, but when I poke it and it springs back, I can feel that there's lots of air in there. So I think we're good to go and move on to the next step. So for rolling it out, I have my rolling pin. I'll need a little bit of bench flour just to prevent sticking. So I'm gonna turn out the dough. You can see that underside of the dough that was in contact with the bowl has like lots of little air bubbles. So it has been rising. I'm gonna get a little flour underneath it. Little flour over top, and I'm just going to use my fingertips and the heel of my hand to just flatten it and get it worked into a little bit of like a square / rectangular shape. That's really what we want. And I like to give it sort of a tug at what I want to become the corners, because anytime you have dough in like a ball, it really wants to stay in that kind of rounded orientation. So it can be a little tricky for beginners to get something into that rectangular shape that you want. So now I'm going to continue to roll it out. I'm going to give it a little bit more flour and then flip it over to prevent sticking. The dough at this stage, it's kind of in that like in between phase of tacky and sticky. I'm just going to flip it over, give a little more flour on this side, and now roll it out. So this part isn't that precise. Really what you're going for is a thickness and a rectangular shape, and beyond that, like the dimensions aren't that important. As I said, the lamination itself is like a little bit of a cheater's lamination. I want to roll it out until it's about like, I hate giving this measurement because it's so annoying, but like 3/8 of an inch, which is just somewhere between 1/4 and 1/2 inch. Just, that's all you have to really pay attention to. If you need to, dust a little more flour underneath if you feel like it's sticking. Okay, so now the next step is getting the butter enclosed in the dough. So I'm going to take my butter mixture and I'm going to dollop it around the bottom 2/3 of the dough. So you see I have it in this long orientation. Thinking about it lengthwise, I'm going to go the bottom 2/3. So this is like the top 2/3. So imagine a line right there. This is the middle, this is the bottom third. Maybe there's like a line there. And I'm only going to put the butter from this line down. You'll see why when I go to fold it up. So I'm just kind of spreading big dollops of the butter in that space, and you can go right to the edges. And make sure you use all of the butter. And notice that the butter itself is like, it's smooth and creamy and softened, but it's not like shiny or greasy looking. So basically what I'm saying is it's sort of cool room temp, it's not warm. You'll just achieve a better texture if your butter is not like on its way to melting. So now I'm going to use this offset spatula and smooth the butter into an even layer all the way to the edges. If you notice any areas where the butter is a little thicker, run your spatula over it, sort of scrape it off a little, and then you can redistribute. So now I'm going to go ahead and fold it in thirds like a letter. This is often called a letter fold for that exact reason. I'm going to take the naked upper third and fold it down along that line where the butter ends. So it's going to cover the middle third. So I'll show you what that looks like. Just going to gently lift it up and pull it down. And the dough is pretty cooperative. So what you can really do is like tug it and pat it down so that you get this like nice straight line, so you feel like you really have folded it down into an even third. To complete that letter fold, I'm going to take the bottom third and fold it up across that middle section again. And what it's going to do is create this series of layers where I have dough, butter, dough, butter, dough. Does that make sense? This is going to come up. And I really do like to make sure all the edges align. It's just going to make your life easier when you go to roll it out. And so the basic process of lamination is now we have enclosed these layers of butter separated by layers of dough, and we're going to roll it out and continue to fold it. So we're going to multiply all those layers. So this is what's called your book in like baking terms. Now, anytime you do what's called a turn, which is that process of rolling and folding, we're going to rotate the book. We have the seam on the top. We're going to rotate it 90 degrees so the seam is to my right. And I do want to get a little bit of additional flour under the dough. So I'm going to kind of move it out of the way for a sec. So now I have that seam on the right, so it would open up to my left if I were to unfold it. And now I'm going to repeat that same rolling and folding process, doing that letter fold in thirds. One of the things you do want to try to do when you're rolling is to maintain somewhat right angles and like square corners. So often I'll do like a little kind of motion with my rolling pin along those edges first. And this is a relatively soft cooperative dough. Like it's pretty relaxed from that rise. So it's not so hard to get it to like do what you want it to do. You can see it rolled out pretty easily. I'm going to give it some more flour. The cheese also creates like kind of its own layers, which is really cool. So you have sort of double layers. You have cheese and butter. You have to have a lot of confidence to do that flip, like hold like the whole dough at once. So if you're like not as confident with dough, you might want to just like use the bench scraper to help you lift up one side, dust a little flour underneath, and then do the other side instead of moving the entire piece. So I can also go this direction a little bit to widen it. If you feel like the dough is springing back on you at any stage, try rolling the other direction. Often you'll get like better sort of extension of the dough if you don't only roll it in one direction. You want to keep it somewhat straight so that when you go to do those folds, you end up with like parallel sides. So this looks good. I'm kind of in that like 3/8 inch zone, and I'm going to repeat that same like tri-fold, letter fold. Doesn't matter if you do it from the bottom. It was important when we incorporated the butter that you do the like uncovered top area first so that you get the separation of layers, but here it doesn't matter. So you can do the bottom. And again, kind of like you can see that I'm pressing it and giving it a little encouragement to meet at all the sides. So a little far. If you need to, give yourself an extra roll. So at this point, we've worked the dough enough that it's not going to let me do another turn, which is aka like another rolling out and folding. So we want to let it rest. When you work dough like this, the gluten kind of activates and will become like stretchy and elastic, and so it's going to want to spring back. So what I want to do is get this really, really cold, because remember I have yeast in this dough, and at room temperature that yeast is going to want to like start, bubbling up and producing gas, and I want to slow that down for the time being until I can really finish my folds. What I'm trying to say is I'm going to throw it in the freezer for like 10 minutes. Let me wrap it up first, and then it's going to go into the fridge for like another 30 or so to really relax. Then we'll come back and do the final fold. We're just doing 2 folds. Oh, I don't have room for this.
Sure.
You think it's cold enough outside?
Absolutely.
So I had the dough out in the cold, the little snow under it for about 10 minutes. Then I went into the fridge. Now I'm going to pull it out because it's been resting in the fridge for like maybe 30 or so. And we're ready to do our final series of folds, rolling and folding. Say that again?
No.
All right, okay. Okay, so I'm going to grab it from the fridge. It has a little bit of dirt on the plastic from the snow I put on top of it. And it's a little wet, the bag. Hold on. It's maybe not my smartest idea. Okay, so after that rest, and letting it chill. It's firmed up quite a bit, so it feels really good. I know that the dough is relaxed, so I'll be able to roll it out and have it extend without springing back. So exact same process. Some flour on the work surface. I'm gonna unwrap it. And remember, you wanna have the dough oriented the right way. So meaning that seam on the right, so it would open up to your left. So a little bit of flour on top. You can just see from the way that it handles, like it's much more solid and firm than it was on that first go around. So you see how I'm applying pressure along the top and bottom edges to kind of help keep them square. Lots of frequent lifting to prevent sticking. So this is the final turn or series of folds. And like for puff pastry, for example, or croissants, you end up doing more. You maybe do like 3 or possibly even 4. But I want like really big, defined, like visible layers. So I think that this amount of folding is perfect for these biscuits. I don't want to do more. What ends up happening is as you do more is you get like, it's a little counterintuitive because you actually get less definition because the layers get so thin. Sorry, that's Archie playing with this toy. So I want to actually widen this slab a little bit because now is really the only time during this process where the dimensions are something I'm paying attention to because I want the final folded piece of dough to be basically the right size for me to cut my biscuits and have them be, you know, about like 1.5 inches or 2 inches square. And this recipe makes 12, which I don't think I mentioned yet. One tip that I tell people about rolling, when you're rolling out a slab like dough like this, instead of pressing, think about like pushing the dough away from your body. And that tends to like just be more effective as a motion. So now I'm ready to do my letter folds. I'm just gonna kind of give this edge a little bit of attention. So I'm just doing that same technique where I'm just making sure that the edges are aligned and that I have nice square corners. It's just gonna make my life easier. And then the bottom third folds up again. And same thing, really kind of like just gently stretching the dough and patting it into place. Now we've already, rolled out the dough and worked it, so it's not gonna wanna roll out for you again really, but if you feel like your packet is kind of thick, like you don't really want it more than 1.25 inches thick, you can try to go over it with your pin at this stage to just flatten it out a little bit and make sure you go in both directions. Okay, this looks great. So now I'm gonna wrap this back in plastic. It's gonna go back into the fridge and it just wants some time to hang out in the fridge, let everything get like really firm and solid. That rest in the fridge also improves flavor and texture, so it's a great overnight. So if you wanna set this up, the next morning we pull them out, cut them, and let them proof again. Okay, and now just back into the fridge. Again, minimum 6 hours, you could go overnight. I wouldn't let it go more than like 16 hours. I have a swap, so I made the biscuits last night. They've been chilling in the fridge. It's been about 12 hours. So now I'm gonna take them out and I'm gonna show you how to cut the biscuits. Then they go back on the same sheet tray, and then they go for their second proof before we bake. Little pro tip about making biscuits. Better to bake them on parchment paper than on a silpat because anything that's really buttery, like cookies or biscuits, tends to spread a lot on silpat. So parchment is actually better for this. So here's my little dough packet. I'm gonna put it onto my cutting board. And just gonna use that same sheet tray for baking, get the parchment on there. I wrapped it in, trying to reuse my plastic bags. So it got a little bit puffier overnight, but not enough. So we do need to let these proof again. So whenever I'm making biscuits, I just hate the idea of trim. So you've probably seen this in other like biscuit or scone videos we've done, where I like to cut them into squares rather than punching out circles, because then I don't have to worry about doing anything with the trim. So I have it in a rectangle, so I'm going to actually cut it into 12 biscuits, cutting through into thirds on the shorter side and quarters on the longer side. And I'm going to do a little bit of trimming, just a little bit along the edges. You can see when you cut to expose the interior, you see like all those thin layers of butter. And that's what's going to cause that separation and make all the layers in the oven. Why didn't I cut them like on the earlier step before I put them in the fridge? The reason is because you get much nicer, cleaner cuts after it's had a really long time to rest and chill and firm up. So you just get these nice lines.
Can you use the scraps for anything?
You can definitely bake these scraps and just like treat them as a little baker snack. So now I'm going to do thirds on the shorter side, just giving myself little guidelines. And then quarters. Okay, so I have my 12 biscuits. I'm going to put them on my lined sheet tray. You can see when I cut them on those cut sides that there is already some like gas production from the yeast, but these need to rise a little bit more. So because these are cold, it's going to take a little while for the yeast to kind of like reactivate and awaken a little bit. So I'm going to cover these. Hold on. I'm going to let these sit until they are a little bit domed. So what I'm looking for is like some additional separation of the layers, and I'm gonna see that the surface is like a little bit humped. So I just want like a slight dome on top. When I was testing these in my kitchen, it took like an hour and a half at like 70-ish, but if it's a little warmer in your kitchen, it could be a little faster. You just don't want it to be too warm because you don't want the butter to soften and like even start to melt, because then you're not gonna get the separation. So sort of a cool-ish room temperature spot, and then we'll come back and bake them. I think these are ready to go. So you can see along the surfaces that there is just like this little domed shape at the top. So they've like puffed up and the yeast has produced all these like little gas bubbles. So these are ready to go. I have my oven on 400. These bake in kind of a hot oven because I want there to be like a big blast of heat to raise the biscuit. So all those little air bubbles expand. And then of course those layers of butter like puff and cause that separation. So I have here just a little bit of extra butter that I melted, and I'm going to use this to brush on top of the biscuits. You could brush the top with buttermilk, that works too. You could sprinkle like a little extra cheese on top. It's really up to you, but I just like using melted butter.
Okay, can I jump in? Is that made for like
No, this
Japanese
is made for,
painting?
yeah, this is made, no, this is made for like soy sauce, like for sushi, or like, you know, brushing the fish with whatever sauce. So it's very soft bristles, which is not always ideal, but I like it. So these are going to go into my oven, which is at 400, and they'll bake until they're like super puffy and golden brown on the top and the bottom. It should take like 15 to 20 minutes. They bake pretty fast. Right on that center rack is where you want it to be. I'll set my timer for 15. So at about the 10-minute mark, I did rotate the pan. There's like pockets of cheese that are coming out. The tops are super golden brown. You see all the layers. They're like so puffy. Now it's very normal that during cooling, they're gonna like lose some of that volume. So they're gonna sink just a little bit because a lot of that is also steam that's escaping. They're pretty small, so they cool somewhat quickly. So I'm just gonna let them rest here. Another really good sign, I don't have a lot of butter pooling on the baking sheet. Sorry, the cat. Sorry. Ringo, stop that. You know what I do? I just shove a pillow at him to like push him away. So one good sign is I don't have a lot of butter that pooled on the baking sheet. So what that tells me is that the dough was like relaxed and well proofed. So it didn't like contract and then like squeeze out all the butter. So they look great. You can see that they've already settled down a little bit. I'm just gonna let them cool. I'll eat them warm still, so it's just gonna take a few minutes. You can see the bottoms, like beautiful golden brown and like tons of layers. They look so good. Should we get Jackson Galaxy? Harrison and I did start watching My Cat from Hell, where Jackson Galaxy goes to people's houses, people who have terrible cats, and he like helps them.
I think it would
like,
be a great
train them.
collaboration.
But I know what he's going to tell us. We need to create more vertical spaces for the cat so that they can go somewhere and not feel stressed out. Harrison and I were like looking around being like, where can we put up like little like shelves where they can like go from like shelf to shelf, like above, like high up. Part of the reason the biscuits settle a little bit is because I have 7 ounces of cheese in there, and the cheese sort of weighs them down a little bit. So that's really normal. But if you were to make these without the cheese, which you can definitely do, and you can add any other kind of flavorings or just keep them plain when it comes to the butter, they will maintain more of that volume. So I'm gonna actually get them off of the hot baking sheet and onto my rack. So now they're still warm, but they're not hot. So a lot of steam has escaped and they're ready to eat. Very excited. I'm gonna cut into one just so you can see what like a cross section looks like, and you can kind of get a look at the layers. Even though they settle down a little bit, they're still like very light for their size. So that's how you know that they're not gonna be like gummy on the inside, so that they've been properly proofed. So that's what it looks like, the cross section. So what I love about these is that combination of flaky, where I can literally like peel off layers, but also fluffy. Like the layers themselves are fluffy because of the yeast. So they've, you know, there's like a crumb to it, which I love. They're so tangy from the buttermilk and the cheese, that like sharp cheddar. And there's something so savory about them, and you're like, what is that? And it's that little bit of onion powder and that raw garlic in the butter itself. They're insanely good. I think that these are like great as a breakfast biscuit. You could like put like a little sausage patty in the middle, which is really good. But they also, because of that kind of fluffy texture, they also make like an insanely good dinner roll. So something you could really have at any point. I used, of course, the Kerrygold Reserve cheddar, which is aged for 2 years. So it's like really sharp and creamy and has like very concentrated flavor, but you could use any like hard grating cheese that you like. I recommend a sharp cheddar. These are so delicious, and it also kind of introduces you to that technique of lamination. It's like a little more low key because you're just kind of spreading the butter on there and folding it and rolling, and like any kind of tears or temperature isn't as important. So really fun, kind of a gateway to like yeasted doughs and lamination, but I think just like not that hard. I want to thank our friends at Kerrygold for sponsoring the episode. I always use Kerrygold butter in all of my baking. I use the butter here in the biscuits, plus their cheddar. Check out their whole range of cheeses and butters at the website below. So thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.